Hello everyone, welcome again to General Psychology, and today we're going to be talking about our senses other than vision, or our non-visual senses. So, we have 5 senses, we've only talked about one, let's talk about the others. And we're going to be talking about some other sensations that we might experience along the way. So first, let's talk about hearing, also known as audition rather than vision. This is our sense or act of hearing. We're really adept as humans to hear the human voice, which is obviously adaptive. We're attuned to different variations, especially in speech and other sounds. And we have 2 ears, which allows us to hear in 3 dimensions. We can tell from what direction certain sounds may be coming. And these sounds are generally made up of sound waves. Sound waves are basically molecules of air bumping into each other. And our ears are able to receive that stimulation and then interpret it and send signals to the brain. Similar to light waves, sound waves also can differ in amplitude and frequency. Amplitude determines the loudness of the noise, and frequency determines the pitch of the sound. And our ear, similar to our eyes, have a lot of biological aspects. They transform vibrating air into nerve impulses. The vibrations travel through the outer ear, into the auditory canal, through the eardrum, into the middle ear where they pass through the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Vibrations are transmitted into the cochlea, where they have a bunch of hair fibers, hair cells on the membrane of the cochlea, which then basically are able to pick up the stimulation. And then those stimulations are then basically transmitted and combined to form an auditory nerve, which then travels into the brain, to the auditory cortex of the temporal lobe. When we talk about hearing loss, we're generally talking about damage to these hair cells that are moving and vibrating and picking up these different forms of stimulation. How do we perceive pitch exactly? There are 2 theories out there. One, place theory, focuses on the fact that it's the location of vibrations on the cochlear membrane that determines what pitch we hear. And alternatively, frequency theory focuses on the frequency of vibrations that hit the hairs and the membrane that determines pitch. Well, both of them are right to a certain extent. We find that it's location that best determines how high a pitch is, and frequency that best determines how low a pitch is. We see that place theory is more important for high pitches and frequency more applicable to low pitches. What about intensity? Well, that's not necessarily determined about how frequently or intensely a hair membrane or hair cell on the membrane is vibrating, but it's determined by the number of hair cells that are activated. And when we talk about individuals who are unable to perceive softer or low intensity noises, we can sometimes see that cochlear implants can restore hearing loss. They translate the softer sounds that the ear might not be able to pick up on into impulses. So some of the hair cells might not be able to pick up on these softer sounds. The cochlear implant does, transfers or transduces them into electromagnetic impulses through nerves and sends them into the brain. Okay, so that's hearing. What about touch? Well, touch is kind of a mixture of multiple different sensations, including pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. Some spots are more sensitive or less sensitive to each of these different sensations, and we tend to be most sensitive to unexpected forms of stimulation. But all in all, touch is extremely important to humans in many different ways. It's important for development. So for example, babies tend to gain weight faster and more frequently when touched by their mothers or another individual, especially mothers. And we see that touch also provides other benefits, especially in terms of intimacy or person-to-person communication. We can also have the sensation of pain. While this isn't necessarily one of the 5 senses that we would typically think of, it is a sensation that we all have. And it's specifically the body's way of telling you that something's not right. It reflects both bottom-up and top-down processing. So we can feel pain and then interpret that to mean something, but we can also expect or experience pain, and we can especially modify pain that we might be experiencing due to things we might be thinking. So, for example, the brain can control pain. One research study found that by simply giving individuals placebos that they thought were pain meds, released natural pain-killing opiates in the body. So the body thought that they were receiving, or the body thought that it was receiving pain medication, And so it decided to help out by releasing these pain-killing opiates. Distraction is also an interesting technique, especially for some procedures that might be extremely painful. By basically having people think of other things or immersing people in, say, for example, a virtual or digital world away from the pain that they might be experiencing, we can actually reduce these sensations of pain. However, the brain can also create pain. We see this occur in what are known as phantom limb sensations. So people who have had limbs lost, maybe legs or arms, may still report sensing or feeling pain in those limbs even though they no longer exist. And we also remember pain differently. Generally, when we think about pain, we focus on peak pain, so the highest intensity pain that we felt during a pain sensation, and then how much pain we felt at the end. So in certain circumstances, it may actually be more helpful for individuals during a painful procedure to extend the procedure just a little bit and have just a tiny bit of pain at the end, and people will be more likely to remember or experience less pain as a result. What about taste? Taste, unlike sight or hearing, is a more chemical sense. We have taste buds on our tongue that have pores that can catch food chemicals when we eat something. These pores have receptor cells that respond to certain tastes, or respond to all tastes. And then they alert the temporal lobe to basically identify us, all right, what are we tasting? We do have many different taste sensations, such as sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, and umami, which is a relatively recent addition to taste sensation, which is focusing on a more savory taste compared to the others. But we do not have specific sections of the tongue that coincide with certain tastes. All of our pores have many different receptors, and each of these receptors may be specifically attuned to certain tastes. But no large regions of the brain are specifically attuned to one taste or the other. Our taste preferences tend to be relatively adaptive, just like our sight and hearing preferences. We tend to be attracted to protein-rich foods for energy and survival, and we tend to be deterred by potentially toxic tasting foods. Again, we talked about this before when talking about evolutionary psychology. Because we're so focused on protein-rich foods, that we may be eating them in excess when we have an abundance of them. Taste is also influenced by expectations. So for example, we may think a bottle of wine that costs $100 actually tastes better than a bottle of wine that only costs $20, even though they might be the exact same wine repackaged in different bottles. We expect the pricier wine to taste better, so it does. And we can also, as we talked about in terms of synesthesia, we tend to see, due to sensory interaction, that we have a much better time tasting objects if we can also smell. Sure, any of you who have had a cold might find that you can actually have difficult time tasting the food that you're eating because you can't also smell. So our brain tends to bleed the input of both our olfactory receptors and our taste receptors. Speaking of olfactory receptors, that's talking about smell. When we smell, we actually are inhaling particles of whatever it is that we're smelling. So molecules of the object or stimulus are actually hitting receptor cells in the top of each of our nasal cavities. These receptors are designed for different types of smells, and then they travel through nerves to alert the brain through axon fibers. Smell is, compared to the other senses, relatively understudied, but it is an extremely important sense. It's one of the least attuned or precise senses. We sometimes, although we can recognize odors, we oftentimes have a difficult time describing odors to other people. And we also see that there are links between brain areas focused on smell and brain areas focused on memory. So generally when we smell something, we can also have a specific memory pop into mind that is related to that smell. So smelling peanut butter cookies, for example, may remind us of grandma's house growing up. Scents are important for development as well. We tend to see that infants and mothers recognize each other's scents. But these preferences are learned. We don't necessarily see smell preferences that are innate. Associations build up over time that allow people to gravitate towards the smells that are more pleasant to them compared to non-pleasant smells. And lastly, we have sensations such as body movement and body position. Kinesthesis is the sensation of the position or movement of our own body parts. Without it, we tend to feel disembodied or separate from our own body, which is a very weird feeling for people who don't have this sensation. And our vestibular sense focuses on the position and movement of the head. And our inner ear specifically holds biological gyroscopes that help us maintain balance and form a sense of equilibrium. So when we have inner ear infections, we tend to be a little bit off balance. We tend to feel a little bit dizzy because that is where our sense of balance, of stability, for example, is located. So that's all I have today. Thank you for your time and attention. I will see you next time. Bye.